The sky above New York City turned black at exactly 15 in the afternoon. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Force headquarters and watched as 3,000 alien ships blocked out the sun. Massive vessels hung in the air like dark clouds, their hulls gleaming with strange blue lights that pulsed like heartbeats. Jake had been a soldier for 15 years. He had seen war in 3 different countries and thought he knew what fear looked like. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that made grown men forget how to breathe. The alien fleet stretched across the horizon in every direction. Each ship was larger than a city block, and there were thousands of them. The communication came through all channels at once. Every television, every radio, every phone on Earth received the same message. The voice was cold and mechanical, speaking perfect English with no emotion at all. I am Admiral Kethfer of the Vorthek Empire. We represent the Galactic Hegemony, a union of 12 species that controls this sector of space. Your species has been selected for integration into our empire. You have 72 hours to surrender your governments and submit to our rule. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your planet. Jake watched as people in the streets below stopped walking and stared up at the sky. Cars came to a halt in the middle of traffic. The entire world had just received notice that it was about to end. President Lisa Hamilton was in the White House Situation Room when the message arrived. She had been president for 3 years and had dealt with wars, natural disasters, and economic crashes. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. The most powerful military leaders on Earth sat around the table looking like scared children. What are options? She asked General Chris Washington, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Washington looked at the intelligence reports spread across the table. Madam President, our entire nuclear arsenal would not be enough to destroy even one of those ships. Our most advanced fighter jets would be like throwing paper airplanes at a tank. We have no options. Across the globe, similar conversations were taking place in every capital city. The leaders of China, Russia, Britain, and every other nation were coming to the same conclusion. Humanity was completely outmatched, but something strange began to happen in the hours that followed. While governments debated surrender, ordinary people made different choices. In a small town in Kansas, a farmer named Danny Rodriguez gathered his neighbors in the local church. They want us to give up without a fight, he said. But my grandfather died fighting fascists in World War II. My father died fighting communists in Vietnam. I will not be the first Rodriguez to surrender to tyrants. In Detroit, factory worker Maya Johnson walked into her supervisor's office. If we're going to die anyway, she said, let's at least make it expensive for them. Within hours, she had convinced 300 workers to begin converting the auto plant into a weapons. FACTORY Dr. Alex Carter was in his laboratory at MIT when the alien message arrived. As a scientist who studied alien life, he had always dreamed of first contact. But not like this. He began analyzing the alien broadcast, looking for any weakness or useful information. What he found surprised him. The hegemony's historical records, transmitted along with their ultimatum, showed a clear pattern. Every species they had conquered had surrendered within hours of receiving the ultimatum. The longest resistance had lasted 6 days, and that species had been considered unusually stubborn. Dr. Carter realized something important. The aliens expected quick surrender because that was all they had ever experienced. They had never fought a species that refused to give up. In New York, Jake Morrison received orders to prepare for the evacuation of all military personnel to underground bunkers. The plan was to preserve as much of the command structure as possible for whatever came after surrender. But as Jake looked out at the alien fleet, he made a different decision. He walked down to the communication center and sent a message to every Earth Defense Force unit around the world. This is Captain Morrison. We are not evacuating. We are not surrendering. We are preparing to fight. Any soldier who wants to run away can do so now. Anyone who wants to show these aliens what humans are made of should report to their battle stations. The response surprised even Jake. Instead of mass desertions, soldiers around the world began volunteering for suicide missions. Pilots requested permission to ram their planes into alien ships. Infantry units began planning impossible attacks against landing sites. President Hamilton watched the reports come in from around the world. Every government was recommending surrender, but the people were choosing to fight. Phone calls flooded the White House from citizens volunteering for military service. Teenagers lied about their age to enlist. Grandparents demanded weapons to defend their homes. She realized that the decision was not really hers to make. The people had already decided. America, and humanity as a whole, was going to fight as the first day ended. Admiral Kethfer reviewed the intelligence reports from Earth. His analysts were confused by human behavior. Every species they had studied chose survival over death when faced with overwhelming odds. It was the logical choice. But humans were not behaving logically. The Admiral ordered a demonstration of power. A single energy pulse from one of his destroyers vaporized an abandoned military satellite. The message was clear. Resistance was pointless. But on Earth, people watched the demonstration and reached a different conclusion. The aliens had just shown that they were not gods. They used weapons like any other army. And if they used weapons, they could be fought. The countdown to humanity's deadline continued. But instead of preparing for surrender, Earth prepared for war. The deadline was 6 hours away when President Lisa Hamilton to the United Nations General Assembly. Every seat was filled with representatives from 193 nations. The room was so quiet that her footsteps echoed. As she approached the podium, television cameras from around the world focused on her face as she began to speak. Representatives of Earth, fellow human beings, we stand at the most important moment in our species' history. 6 hours ago, an alien empire demanded our surrender. They have given us technology beyond our understanding and weapons that could destroy our planet in minutes. Logic tells us we should submit. She paused and looked directly into the camera. But we are not a logical species. We are human beings, and human beings do not kneel to tyrants. The assembly erupted in applause, but Hamilton raised her hand for silence. Make no mistake about the cost of this decision. Many of us will die. Our cities may burn. Our children may never know the peace we have tried to build. But they will know that their parents chose freedom over slavery. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Kethfer watched the broadcast with confusion. His tactical computer had calculated a 98% probability that humans would surrender. The intelligence reports from 12 conquered species all showed the same pattern. When faced with certain death, intelligent beings chose survival. Commander Ryan Blake was already in motion before the president finished speaking. He had been planning this mission since the first day of the ultimatum. Intelligence reports showed that alien scout ships made regular patrols around Earth. One of those ships had suffered engine problems and crashed in the Canadian wilderness. 3 days ago, Blake's team of 12 soldiers moved through the forest like ghosts. With them was engineer Maya Johnson, who had volunteered to leave her factory job for this mission. Also present was communications specialist Peter Walsh, a former Navy technician who understood alien technology better than most humans. The crashed ship was exactly where satellite images had shown it would be. It was smaller than the massive vessels hanging over the cities, but still larger than any aircraft humans had ever built. The hull was cracked open like an egg, revealing the strange blue-lit interior. Remember, Blake whispered to his team, we need information more than weapons. Find their computers, their communication systems, anything that tells us how they think. Maya crawled into the ship first. The alien technology was like nothing she had ever seen, but machinery was machinery. Within an hour, she had found the ship's main computer and begun downloading its contents. What she discovered changed everything. The aliens did not think like humans. Their entire civilization was based on mathematical probability. They calculated the cost and benefit of every action. When the cost became too high, they stopped. They had never encountered a species that continued fighting when victory was mathematically impossible. Peter Walsh made an even more important discovery. The alien technology depended on quantum resonance frequencies. All of their weapons, their shields, their engines used the same basic principle. And Peter knew how to disrupt quantum resonance. While Blake's team worked in the wilderness, ordinary people across Earth made extraordinary choices. In Los Angeles, high school teacher Kelly Brooks turned her classroom into a resistance planning center. She taught her students how to make explosives from household chemicals and how to coordinate guerrilla attacks using social media. If we're going to die, she told her students, we're going to teach these aliens that humans don't die quietly. In Chicago, factory supervisor Danny Rodriguez organized his workers into something that had never existed before, an industrial resistance cell. They began modifying construction equipment into weapons and converting assembly lines to produce ammunition. Danny had fought in Afghanistan and knew how to turn ordinary people into soldiers. We built this country with our hands, he told his workers. Now we're going to defend it the same way. The aliens noticed these activities but could not understand them. Their own species had never engaged in what humans called guerrilla warfare. When the hegemony conquered a planet, the population either surrendered or died in conventional battles. They had no experience with civilians who became combatants. Dr. Alex Carter spent the remaining hours analyzing every piece of alien communication he could intercept. What he learned disturbed him more than the threat of invasion. The hegemony had conquered 47 different species over the past 1,000 years. Every single conquest had followed the same pattern: ultimatum, demonstration of force, surrender, integration. But Alex also discovered something the aliens did not want humans to know. 3 of those conquered species had attempted rebellion after their surrender. All 3 rebellions had been crushed, but they had cost the hegemony enormous resources. The alien empire was not as stable as they wanted Earth to believe. Captain Jake Morrison used the final hours to coordinate with military units around the world. The plan was simple. When the aliens attacked, humans would not try to win conventional battles. Instead, they would make every mile of Earth cost the invaders blood. We're not trying to defeat their entire fleet, he explained to his officers. We're trying to make them pay such a high price that they decide Earth isn't worth the cost. The strategy was based on humanity's own history. The British Empire had controlled 1/4 of the world's land and population, but small groups of determined rebels had eventually forced them to withdraw from dozens of colonies. The Soviet Union had possessed the world's largest army, but Afghan fighters with primitive weapons had made their occupation unsustainable. As the deadline approached, Admiral Kethfer sent one final message to Earth. This is your last opportunity. To avoid unnecessary death, surrender now and your species will be granted favorable terms within the hegemony. President Hamilton's response was broadcast on every channel on Earth. Admiral Kethfer, we appreciate your offer, but there seems to be a misunderstanding. We are not interested in favorable terms. We are not interested in any terms. We are human beings, and human beings do not negotiate with invaders. If you want our planet, come and take it. The message that followed traveled faster than light to the hegemony capital. For the first time in 1,000 years, a species had rejected their ultimatum. The Hegemony Council convened an emergency session to discuss this unprecedented situation. On Earth, the final minutes ticked away. In cities and towns around the world, humans made peace with their gods and checked their weapons one last time. Parents hugged their children and told them stories about heroes who had fought impossible odds. When the deadline expired, Admiral Kethfer gave the order he had given 47 times before. But this time, he wondered if the mathematical certainty of victory might not be as certain as his computers claimed. The invasion of Earth began at exactly noon, Greenwich Mean Time, and for the first time in their history, the Galactic Hegemony was about to learn what it meant to fight a species that refused to kneel. The first wave of orbital bombardment began at exactly 12:01. Massive energy beams fell from the sky like lightning, targeting military bases, government buildings, and communication centers. The alien strategy was simple: destroy Earth's ability to coordinate resistance and force, immediate surrender. But the aliens discovered that humans had spent their 72 hours preparing for exactly this attack. Colonel Steve Mitchell watched from his underground command center as the surface installations he had evacuated were destroyed. The real military headquarters were now 50 feet below ground, connected by tunnels that stretched across entire continents. Phase 1 complete, Mitchell reported to his global network. Surface assets destroyed as expected. All critical personnel and equipment relocated to bunker systems, beginning Phase 2. What the aliens had not expected was that humans had studied their own history. Every successful resistance movement had learned the same lesson. When fighting a superior enemy, you do not defend fixed positions. You disappear underground and make the enemy come find you. Pilot Jenny Adams had volunteered for the mission that everyone knew was suicide. Her squadron of 20 modified fighters carried the quantum disruptors that Peter Walsh had designed from the crashed alien ship. The devices were untested and probably would not work, but they represented humanity's only chance to prove that alien ships could be destroyed. Jenny led her squadron up through the clouds toward the massive alien fleet. The enemy ships hung in the sky like floating cities, their weapons already charging for another bombardment. Jenny knew that her planes were invisible to the aliens until they got close enough to attack. Remember, she told her pilots over the radio, we only get one shot. Make it count. The first alien ship to die was a destroyer that had dropped low to target a hidden bunker. Jenny's disruptor beam hit it directly in the engine section, and the quantum resonance that powered the ship collapsed in on itself. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. They bleed, Jenny shouted into her radio as she watched the alien ship fall. They bleed so they can die. Her words were picked up by radio operators around the world and repeated in every language on Earth. The aliens were not gods. They were just another enemy, and humans knew how to kill enemies. Jenny's squadron managed to destroy 2 more ships before the aliens adapted their defenses. Energy beams from the remaining fleet turned her fighters into clouds of vapor, but the damage was done. Around the world, humans watched the explosions in the sky and realized that victory might be possible. Alien ground invasion began 6 hours later. Massive transport ships landed in major cities and began disgorging troops. The aliens expected to find terrified civilians begging for mercy. Instead, they found empty streets and silent buildings. Sergeant Tony Parker had been a Marine for 20 years. He had fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. He knew how to turn cities into killing zones. When the first alien soldiers marched down Fifth Avenue in New York, they walked into a trap that Parker had spent 3 days preparing. The explosions came from everywhere at once. Bombs hidden in manholes, sniper fire from windows, rockets launched from rooftops. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy they could not see in a city that had become a maze of death. Parker's radio crackled with reports from around the world. In London, former SAS soldiers were using the underground tunnels to attack alien supply lines. In Tokyo, Yakuza gangsters were teaching civilians how to make improvised weapons. In Moscow, retired Spetsnaz operators were training teenagers to become urban guerrillas. The aliens had expected resistance from military units. They had not expected resistance from everyone. Grandmothers threw Molotov cocktails from apartment windows. Children led alien patrols into ambushes. Shop owners turned their stores into bomb factories. Dr. Alex Carter worked frantically in his hidden laboratory, analyzing the alien prisoners that Parker's teams had captured. What he learned shocked him. The aliens were not cruel conquerors who enjoyed causing pain. They were logical beings who had calculated that humans would surrender when resistance became too costly. "They don't understand us," Alex explained to President Hamilton during a secure video call. "Every species they have conquered before was rational. When the cost of resistance exceeded the benefit, they gave up. But we're not rational. We'll keep fighting even when we know we can't win." The president was calling from a bunker 300 feet below Washington, D.C. The White House above had been destroyed in the first bombardment, but the government continued to function. "So you're saying they think we're insane?" "Exactly," Alex replied. "And that's our advantage. They can't predict our behavior because it doesn't follow logical patterns." The war's first major battle took place in Los Angeles 3 days after the invasion began. An entire alien division had landed at Lax Airport, expecting to secure the city within hours. Instead, they found themselves trapped in urban warfare against an enemy that refused to follow conventional tactics. Factory worker Maria Gonzalez had never held a gun before the invasion. But when aliens landed near her neighborhood, she became something that surprised even her, a warrior. She organized her coworkers into a fighting unit that turned the industrial district into a fortress. "We built these machines," she told her followers as they converted assembly lines into weapons factories. "Now we use them to kill the bastards who want to enslave us." The battle for Los Angeles lasted 2 weeks. When it ended, the aliens had taken the city, but they had lost over half their invasion force. Similar battles were raging in every major city on Earth. The aliens were winning, but they were paying a price that none of their strategists had calculated. Admiral Kethfer studied the casualty reports with growing alarm. His fleet had suffered more losses in 3 weeks of fighting humans than in the previous century of conquering other species. The mathematical models that had predicted easy victory were proving to be completely wrong. The admiral sent a report to the Hegemony Council that would have been impossible just a month earlier. Human resistance exceeds all projections. Recommend immediate reinforcement of invasion forces. But the most disturbing news came from the intelligence division. Radio intercepts showed that humans were broadcasting their resistance techniques to other planets in the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for decades were beginning to ask dangerous questions about their own situations. On the planet Kepler 442b, a mining colony where the enslaved Threnody had worked for 50 years without complaint, something unprecedented happened. A group of workers led by human engineer Sam Cooper staged a revolt against their hegemony overseers. The revolt failed, but the message reached every enslaved world in the galaxy. Resistance was possible. The mighty hegemony could be hurt. The humans had proven it. Colonel Mitchell coordinated the global resistance from his underground command center. The news from around the world was both encouraging and terrifying. Humans were fighting with a ferocity that surprised even their own leaders, but the cost was enormous. Entire cities lay in ruins. Millions of people were dead, but something remarkable was happening. With each passing day, human resistance became more organized and more effective. Children who had never seen war were learning to build bombs. Office workers were becoming snipers. The entire species was transforming itself into something it had never been before. A nation of warriors who would rather die than surrender. The aliens had expected to conquer Earth in a matter of days. Instead, they found themselves bogged down in a war that seemed to have no end. Every victory cost them more than they could afford. Every defeat made the humans fight harder, and in the depths of space, other species were watching and learning. The humans had done something that no one thought possible. They had made the galactic hegemony bleed. The quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy had never carried messages like the ones spreading from Earth. Video footage of human resistance fighters destroying alien tanks was being broadcast to mining colonies, slave worlds, and subjugated planets across thousands of star systems. Marine Captain Lisa Turner had discovered something that would change the course of the war. While analyzing captured alien communication equipment, she realized that the hegemony's control over their empire depended entirely on their reputation for being unbeatable. Every enslaved species believed that resistance was impossible because the hegemony had never lost a battle. But they're losing battles now, Lisa explained to her intelligence team from a bunker beneath the ruins of San Francisco. Every time we kill one of their soldiers, every time we destroy one of their ships, we prove that they can be beaten. And that message is spreading to every world they control. The proof came from intercepted transmissions. On the desert planet of Zarian Prime, the reptilian Cathani species had served as slave laborers for over 2 centuries. But after watching human broadcasts of the battle for New York, a group of Cathani workers had attacked their overseers with mining equipment. Similar uprisings were reported from 7 other worlds within the first month of Earth's resistance. The hegemony found themselves fighting not just humans, but rebellions on multiple fronts across their empire. The war on Earth had entered its 4th month when factory supervisor Maria Gonzalez made her stand at New Detroit. The city had been evacuated weeks earlier, but Maria and 300 volunteers had stayed behind to defend the industrial complex that produced weapons for the resistance. The aliens came with overwhelming force, 2,000 troops, 50 hover tanks, and air support from orbiting destroyers. Maria's defenders had improvised weapons, booby traps, and the absolute determination not to let the enemy take their factory without paying for it in blood. "They want our machines," Maria told her people as alien forces surrounded the complex. "But these machines built America, and America doesn't surrender to anyone." The battle lasted 3 weeks. When it ended, the factory was destroyed and Maria Gonzalez was dead. But her defense had cost the aliens over half their assault force. More importantly, the entire battle had been broadcast live to resistance cells around the world. Children on Earth began to learn Maria Gonzalez's name alongside George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Her last words, transmitted just before an alien bomb destroyed her position, became a battle cry, "Tell them we held the line." Admiral Kethfer faced his worst nightmare as casualty reports continued to mount. The human war was consuming resources that the hegemony could not afford to lose. Worse, the rebellion was spreading to worlds that had been peaceful for generations. The Admiral's tactical computers still predicted eventual victory on Earth, but the cost projections were staggering. To completely pacify humanity would require the destruction of 90% of the human population and the commitment of over half the hegemony's total military forces. "The humans are not fighting to win," Kethfer explained to the Hegemony Council during an emergency session. "They are fighting to make victory too expensive for us to afford." Intelligence officer Rachel Martinez had been studying alien communications for 6 months when she made the discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the financial records of the hegemony's central government were numbers that told a story of an empire in crisis. "They're broke," Rachel reported to President Hamilton from her underground facility. "The hegemony economy is based on tribute from conquered worlds. But the rebellions we've inspired are cutting off that income. Meanwhile, the cost of maintaining control is skyrocketing." The president studied the data with amazement. "Are you telling me that our resistance is bankrupting them?" "Not just our resistance," Rachel replied. "The rebellions on 23 other worlds. The hegemony built their empire on the assumption that conquered species would stay conquered. They never budgeted for simultaneous rebellions across multiple star systems." In space, Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded what remained of Earth's space fleet from a hidden base in the asteroid belt. Her ships were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but they had learned tactics that the aliens could not counter. Kate's strategy was simple: never fight fair. Her ships would appear from behind asteroids, fire everything they had at alien supply convoys, and disappear before the enemy could respond. It was piracy on an interstellar scale, and it was working. "We can't defeat their main fleet," Kate explained to her captains during a strategy meeting, "but we can make it impossible for them to supply their ground forces. Every transport we destroy is food and ammunition that doesn't reach their troops on Earth." The hit-and-run attacks were having an effect that surprised even Kate. The hegemony was forced to divert warships from other sectors to protect their supply lines. This created opportunities for rebellions on other worlds to grow stronger. Dr. Alex Carter had spent 8 months studying alien prisoners when he finally understood the true weakness of the hegemony. The aliens were not evil conquerors who enjoyed causing suffering. They were a coalition of logical species who had built their empire on mathematical calculations of cost and benefit. "They're accountants," Alex explained to a gathering of resistance leaders. "They conquered the galaxy not through cruelty, but through efficient resource management. But efficiency breaks down when the costs become unpredictable." The virus that Alex designed was not meant to destroy alien computers. Instead, it was designed to make their systems unreliable. Random errors in navigation, communication failures at critical moments, weapons that fired at the wrong targets. The virus spread through alien networks like a plague of confusion. The turning point came during the battle for Chicago. Colonel Steve Mitchell had transformed the city into a fortress of underground tunnels and hidden weapons. When the aliens finally decided to destroy the city completely rather than continue losing troops in street fighting, they discovered that their orbital bombardment systems were malfunctioning. Ships fired at empty buildings while resistance fighters remained safe in their bunkers. Navigation systems directed alien troops into carefully prepared ambushes. Communication networks broadcast human propaganda instead of military orders. "The machines are turning against them," Mitchell reported to resistance commanders around the world. "Their own technology is becoming their enemy." The psychological effect on alien forces was devastating. Troops who had conquered dozens of worlds without question began to doubt their equipment, their leaders, and their mission. Desertions increased. Morale collapsed, but the humans paid a terrible price for their victories. Earth's population had been reduced from 8 billion to 4 billion. Most major cities were ruins. Entire nations had been wiped from the map, yet something remarkable had emerged from the ashes. The humans who survived were not the same species that had received the hegemony's ultimatum a year earlier. They had become something harder, more determined, more unified than they had ever been before. Children who had grown up during the war knew how to build explosives before they learned to read. Teenagers led commando raids against alien positions with the casual confidence of veterans. Grandparents taught guerrilla tactics to anyone willing to learn. Ben Carter, Dr. Carter's 15-year-old nephew, commanded a unit of child soldiers. In the ruins of Boston, his squad had destroyed more alien equipment than some regular army units. When asked by a war correspondent how he stayed so calm under fire, Ben replied with words that would be remembered for generations. "Fear is for people who have something to lose," he said. "We already lost everything. Now all we have left is the fight." The message that Earth broadcast to the galaxy was simple but powerful. Resistance was not only possible, it was profitable. The mighty hegemony was not invincible. They could be hurt, they could be bankrupted, and they could be defeated. On worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, beings who had never known freedom began to dream of rebellion. The spark that humanity had lit was becoming a fire that would consume the galaxy. The war entered its second year with Earth transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the humans who had first received the alien ultimatum. Half the planet's population was dead, most cities lay in ruins, but the resistance had only grown stronger. Ben Carter stood in the ruins of what had once been Harvard University, teaching a class of 12-year-old children how to properly aim a rocket launcher. At 16, he was considered a veteran by the standards of the FIA. New World. He had been fighting aliens since he was 14, and he commanded more respect from adult soldiers than most generals had before the war. Remember, Ben told his students as they practiced with deactivated weapons, the aliens think logically. They expect us to hide when they attack and surrender when we're surrounded. So we do the opposite. We attack when they think we're hiding, and we fight harder when they think we're beaten. The children nodded with the serious attention that kids their age had once reserved for video games. War had become their education, and they were learning lessons that no human children had ever been taught. In the underground command center that stretched beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C., intelligence officer Rachel Martinez presented her LATEST analysis to President Hamilton. The numbers told a story that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. "The hegemony is collapsing," Rachel reported. "Rebellions are now active on 43 worlds. Their military is spread so thin that they can't respond effectively to any single uprising. Their economy is in free fall because tribute payments have stopped coming from most of their territories." President Hamilton studied the holographic display that showed rebel activity across the galaxy. Each red dot represented a world in open revolt against hegemony rule. The map looked like a disease spreading through the alien empire. "How much of this can we take credit for?" Hamilton asked. "All of it," Rachel replied. "Every single rebellion can be traced back to our example. We showed the galaxy that the hegemony could be hurt. Once other species realized that, resistance became inevitable." The proof of Rachel's analysis was coming through quantum communication channels every day. Video messages from rebel leaders on distant worlds thanked humanity for showing them that freedom was possible. Tactical manuals developed by human resistance fighters were being translated into dozens of alien languages on the industrial world of Sigma Draconis. The insectoid Zephyrians had overthrown their hegemony overseers using techniques learned from Maria Gonzalez's Last Stand. On the ocean planet of Kepler 438b, aquatic rebels used submarine warfare tactics borrowed from human naval history. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the Earth fleet from a mobile base that moved constantly through the outer solar system. Her ships had evolved from desperate survivors into something that terrified hegemony supply convoys, ghosts that appeared without warning, struck with deadly precision, and vanished before retaliation was possible. "We've lost 70% of our original fleet," Kate reported to the Joint Chiefs during a secure conference. But we've destroyed over 300 enemy ships and captured enough alien technology to build weapons they can't defend against. The captured alien technology had allowed human engineers to create weapons that even the hegemony had never seen. Quantum torpedoes that could phase through shields, virus bombs that turned alien computers against their operators, and stealth fighters that were completely invisible to alien sensors. But the most devastating weapon humans had developed was not technological. It was cultural. The idea that freedom was worth dying for was spreading through the galaxy like a virus, infecting species that had been slaves for centuries. Dr. Alex Carter had spent 2 years studying alien psychology, and his research had led to a breakthrough that changed the entire nature of the war. The virus he had developed was no longer just disrupting alien computers. It was reprogramming them to broadcast human messages to every world in the hegemony. "We're not just fighting a military war anymore," Alex explained to a gathering of resistance leaders. "We're fighting a war of ideas. Every time one of their computers broadcasts a message about human freedom, we're recruiting new rebels." The psychological warfare was having effects that surprised even its designers. Alien troops were beginning to question their orders. Hegemony officials were defecting to join human-inspired rebellions. The very idea of absolute authority was crumbling throughout the empire. Colonel Steve Mitchell coordinated global resistance from a command center that moved constantly through underground tunnels. His network now included not just human fighters, but alien rebels who had joined the cause of freedom. "The enemy is no longer just the hegemony," Mitchell reported. "The enemy is the idea that some beings have the right to rule others, and that idea is dying throughout the galaxy." The proof of Mitchell's observation came from intercepted hegemony communications. Their generals were reporting that many of their own soldiers were refusing to fight. Entire units were surrendering to human forces rather than continue a war they no longer believed in. The battle for Europe became the symbol of humanity's transformation from victims to liberators. When hegemony forces attempted to destroy the last free cities on the continent, they found themselves fighting not just human resistance fighters, but alien defectors who had joined the cause of freedom. Jenny Adams had died in the first months of the war, but her words had become a battle cry that echoed across the galaxy. "They bleed so they can die." Now alien rebels were shouting the same words in their own languages as they attacked their former masters. The economic warfare that Rachel Martinez had identified was proving to be as destructive as any military campaign. The hegemony had built their empire on tribute from conquered worlds, but that tribute had stopped flowing. Meanwhile, the cost of maintaining control over rebellious populations was bankrupting the imperial treasury. Admiral Kethver faced the crisis he had been dreading. Since the war began, the Hegemony Council was demanding that he end the human rebellion immediately, but his tactical computers were now projecting that complete victory would require resources the Empire did not possess. "The humans have changed the rules of war," Kethver reported to his superiors. "They are not fighting to win territory or resources, they are fighting to spread an idea. And ideas are harder to kill than armies." The Admiral's words were prophetic. Human broadcasts were now reaching every corner of the galaxy, carrying messages of freedom and resistance. Species that had been enslaved for millennia were learning that their chains were not unbreakable. On Earth, the generation that had been children when the war began was coming of age as something entirely new, humans who had never known submission. They fought with a casual competence that amazed older soldiers and a complete inability to understand the concept of surrender. Ben Carter, now 17 and commanding a battalion of teenage fighters, received a message from his uncle Dr. Carter. That changed his understanding of the war's importance. "You're not just fighting for Earth anymore," the doctor told his nephew. You're fighting for the future of intelligence in the galaxy. The question is whether thinking beings will be free or slaves, and that question will be answered by your generation. The message that Earth broadcast to the galaxy on the second anniversary of the invasion was no longer a call for help. It was a promise of liberation. To every enslaved world, to every conquered species, to every being who dreams of freedom. President Hamilton said in a broadcast that reached 1 trillion listeners, "We are coming. The chains that bind you are not permanent. The masters who rule you are not gods. And the humans of Earth will not rest until every thinking being in the Fang galaxy has the chance to choose their own destiny." The hegemony's response was swift and desperate. They announced that Earth would be completely destroyed rather than allowed to continue spreading rebellion. But by then, it was too late. The idea of freedom had already infected too many worlds, reached too many minds, inspired too many rebels. War for Earth had become a war for the galaxy, and humanity was no longer fighting alone. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council convened in a fortress deep within their capital world, surrounded by security measures that had never failed to protect the Empire's leaders. But for the first time in 1,000 years, those leaders were afraid. Admiral Kethfer stood before the 12 representatives of the species that had built the Galactic Empire. The holographic displays around the chamber showed a map that would have been impossible to imagine 3 years earlier. Over. Half the galaxy was now in open rebellion. "The situation has become untenable," Kethfer reported. "We are fighting simultaneous wars on 67 worlds. Our military forces are stretched beyond capacity. Our economy is in collapse. The treasury is empty." The crystalline Vorthik elder, who led the council, spoke with the cold logic that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. "Then we implement the final solution. Destroy Earth completely. Make an example that will terrify other rebels into submission." But Kethfer had news that made even that option impossible. "Our fleet above Earth is no longer capable of planetary destruction. Human attacks have damaged our heavy weapon systems. More critically, 40% of our crews have either defected or are refusing orders." The silence that followed was the sound of an empire dying. On Earth, President Lisa Hamilton governed from a bunker system that now stretched beneath 3 continents. The surface world was still largely ruins, but humanity had built something new in the depths, a civilization designed for eternal war, run by people who had never learned to surrender. The intelligence report from Rachel Martinez contained news that would have seemed like fantasy when the war began. The hegemony was offering to negotiate. "They want a ceasefire," Rachel explained to the president and her advisors. "They're willing to recognize Earth as an independent world in exchange for humanity ending its support for rebellions throughout the galaxy." General Chris Washington, now commanding resistance forces from his own underground complex, shook his head in disbelief. 3 years ago, they demanded our complete surrender. Now they're offering us independence. What changed? Dr. Alex Carter answered from his laboratory, where he had spent years studying the psychology of power. "They realized that we never wanted to conquer them. We just wanted to destroy the idea that anyone has the right to rule over others. And that idea is now spreading faster than they can stop it." The debate that followed would determine the future of intelligent life in the galaxy. Some argued that humanity had suffered enough, that they should accept independence and rebuild their shattered world. Others insisted that the fight was bigger than Earth. Captain Jake Morrison, now a general commanding global defense forces, spoke for the military leadership. "We've lost 4 billion people in this war. We have a chance to save what's left of our species. We should take it." But Ben Carter, representing the generation that had grown up during the war, disagreed. "We didn't fight to save just ourselves. We fought because enslaving thinking beings is wrong. If we stop now, the hegemony will eventually recover and enslave. New worlds. The killing will just start over somewhere else. The debate raged for days, but it was ultimately decided not by governments or generals, but by the people themselves. Across the ruins of Earth, in underground cities and hidden bunkers, humans voted on the most important question in their history. The results surprised no one who understood what humanity had become. By a margin of 87%, they chose to continue the fight. President Hamilton announced humanity's decision in a broadcast that reached every corner of the galaxy. The hegemony has offered us peace in exchange for abandoning our allies. We reject this offer. We will continue to fight until every enslaved world is free, until every conquered species has the chance to choose its own government, until the very idea of involuntary servitude is extinct throughout the galaxy. Response from rebellious worlds was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of gratitude poured in from dozens of species. The Zephyrians of Sigma Draconis broadcast a statement that spoke for rebels everywhere. The humans taught us that freedom is possible. Now they have shown us that some principles are worth more than survival itself. Admiral Kethfar received the news in his command ship orbiting Earth. For a species that calculated everything in terms of cost and benefit, humanity's decision was incomprehensible. They had chosen certain continued suffering over possible peace. But Kethfar was beginning to understand something that the hegemony council could not accept. The humans were right. An empire built on the enslavement of other species was morally indefensible, regardless of its efficiency or profitability. The admiral made a decision that shocked both sides of the war. He opened a private communication channel to President Hamilton and made an offer that no hegemony officer had ever made before. Madam President, I wish to defect. I can bring with me detailed intelligence about hegemony military positions, supply lines, and strategic weaknesses. In exchange, I ask only that you accept my surrender and allow me to serve the cause of freedom. The defection of the hegemony's top military commander sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. If Admiral Kethfar could change sides, then no one's. Loyalty to the Empire was certain. The final phase of the war began not with massive battles, but with the collapse of the idea that had held the hegemony together, the belief that some beings were born to rule, while others were born to serve. Colonel Steve Mitchell coordinated the liberation campaigns that spread across the galaxy. Human advisors, working with local rebels, taught the tactics that had proven successful on Earth, but more importantly, they taught the philosophy that made those tactics possible. Freedom is not something you ask for, Mitchell explained to a gathering of rebel leaders from 12 different species. Freedom is something you take. And once you understand that, no one can ever enslave you again. The war that had begun with humanity's refusal to kneel ended with the dissolution of the galactic hegemony. One by one, enslaved worlds declared their independence. Species that had served as overlords found themselves overthrown by those they had oppressed. Dr. Alex Carter lived to see his virus accomplish something he had never imagined: the complete reprogramming of galactic civilization. The networks that had once carried orders from masters to slaves now carried messages of cooperation between free peoples. 5 years after the war ended, Ben Carter stood in the rebuilt city of Boston, addressing a gathering of beings from 50 different worlds. At 22, he was considered one of the elder statesmen of the new galactic order. People asked me why humanity refused to kneel, he said to the assembled crowd of humans and aliens. The answer is simple. We had seen what kneeling led to. We had studied our own history and learned that submission to tyrants never brings peace, only a different form of war. He gestured to the mixed crowd before him, beings who had once been enemies now working together as equals. This is what we fought for. Not human dominance, but the right of every thinking being to stand upright and choose their own path. The message that went out from Earth that day was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. We are humanity. We chose to fight when surrender would have been easier. We chose to continue fighting when victory seemed impossible. We chose to keep fighting when peace was offered at the price of abandoning our principles. We made these choices because we believe that freedom is not just a human right, but the birthright of every intelligent being in the universe. The broadcast ended with words that had become the motto of the new galactic civilization. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We do not forget. And we will never stop fighting for the right of all beings to live free. In the ruins of the old hegemony capital, the former Admiral Kethfer worked alongside human engineers to design the constitution of the new Galactic Federation. The document began with principles that would have been incomprehensible to the old empire. All intelligent beings are created equal. No species has the right to rule over another. Freedom is not granted by governments but exists as the natural state of all thinking creatures. The war that had begun with 3,000 alien ships demanding humanity's surrender had ended with the transformation of the galaxy itself. The humans had refused to kneel, and in doing so, they had taught the universe to stand upright. And, in schools across 1,000 worlds, children of dozens of different species learned the story of how a small blue planet had changed everything. Simply by refusing to accept that slavery was inevitable. The lesson was simple, but its implications were infinite. When free beings refuse to kneel, no empire can stand against them.